Okay, so welcome to the first episode of the Path Less Chosen pod, the podcast showing you the careers they don't teach you about in school. I'm Jamie Khan.
And I'm Sol Hyde.
So today we've got our first guest on the podcast, someone I've known for a few years now. He's called Callum Lea, and I think he's probably a very good guest to have on our first episode. He's gone down two different career paths, which is slightly unusual. So the first thing he's done, and how some people might already know him, is he founded a charity originally called Sporting Minds UK, and it's now changed its name to Sporting Wellness, but we'll get into some detail on that. It's a charity that basically offers free mental health service to athletes. And it's come from a bit of a personal experience from Callum, which I'm sure he'll tell us about. The charity at the moment, they've got 50,000 followers on Instagram, and they've done pretty well in their first few years, considering he set it up when he was only 19. They've now helped over 1,600 athletes in over 100 sports, and they have some top sportsmen and sportswomen as their ambassadors. I know their patron is Louis Rees-Summit. So yeah, incredible for what he's done in the first few years. And then he's also coming out of university. He started out on a sports agency route, and he represents a couple of cricketers with a good cricket company, which hopefully we'll have time to get into as well. But hopefully get lots of good stuff out of it.
100%. I definitely think such a young guy started a charity. Like a lot of people we know our age are going into jobs where they're kind of chasing money, and perhaps a lot of things can be learned from that. So I'm interested to get into like what motivated him for that. And like I think the last thing which would be interesting, as a lot of people find as well, is how did he deal with the distractions, especially going to university?
Absolutely. No, there's a lot to get into. So yeah, let's get going. Let's get Callum.
Welcome to the Path Less Chosen pod. Pleasure to have you as our very first guest. Obviously, couldn't have thought of anyone better. So now with you, I know there's a lot to get into, but before we do, God forbid someone listening might not know who you are yet. Let's just enlighten them a little bit. Can you just give us an overview of where your more unusual career path currently stands and what you're up to at the moment?
Yeah, cool. Well, thanks a lot for having me on the first episode. Name's Callum, and I'm the founder of a charity called Sporting Wellness, which is an organisation that provides free private mental health care to any athlete in the UK. And then I also work as a cricket agent as well. So it's sort of a bit of a dual career that I've done since I left school, that I built up whilst I was at uni. And I'm now 23, just moved to London, and yeah.
Yeah, nice. I think you're going to be quite a unique guest anyway. I think even though some of the people we're going to be speaking to have gone down certain paths, you've gone down too, that we want to ask about. So I think to begin with, we'll be focusing on the sporting wellness side. I think probably the first question is where it began and why. What was the kind of starting motivation for you on your journey down to what led you to sporting wellness?
Yeah, so I was always a cricketer. In terms of, that was my biggest passion growing up, really. Ever since I was probably aged about 8 or 9, I wanted to be a cricketer in some capacity, and ultimately a professional cricketer as I got older. That was really the career that I wanted to do. And I think at any age before probably 19, if someone would have asked me what I wanted to do, I would have said be a pro cricketer, and then I would have probably talked about having a backup plan around doing a traditional job in something like finance. But I think deep down I knew that as well as probably not ever going to be good enough to be a pro cricketer, I was also never really fancying going down that traditional path anyway. So cricket was always what I did. And then I got to about 18, 19, and I realized that I wasn't going to become a professional cricketer, and that wasn't going to be a viable career option for me. And that sort of coincided with me going through a period of struggling with mental health issues, which was quite alien to me and something that I'd never experienced before. I'd always respected mental health as a topic and knew it was a serious thing, but relating to myself personally, I probably didn't take it anywhere near as seriously as I should have done, which looking back was a huge mistake. And so that experience of being a cricketer and going through mental health issues prompted me to look into the support that was on offer for me within my sport. And long story short, because I wasn't a contracted professional, I wasn't entitled to any. And then when I looked deeper into it, not just within cricket, but across all sports in the UK, I realized that the equality of access to private mental health care and professional services was completely non-existent. And so that's really what planted a bit of a seed in my mind around wanting to create my own organization that did try and offer that equality of access to mental health care. and that's eventually grown into a charity that I now work in, pretty much full time, but I suppose technically part time.
So what kind of age was that? Because obviously the decision to look into the mental health stuff, I guess, started when you were younger and still thinking of this professional cricket route. But for like a 15, 16-year-old to start thinking about maybe starting up a charity is a whole nother ball game.
Yeah, well, it definitely didn't come about when I was 15, 16. It was much more when I'd left school. I was probably just before I turned 19. So I was still 18. And it all happened quite quickly in terms of having the idea for it and then starting it. There was no real build up to it. It was something that just popped into my mind really in, I think it was October 2018. And then I didn't really do loads about it until I got back from my gap year in 2019. And then the summer of 2019 was when I actually thought like, right, I've had this idea to do this charity, and now I'm going to properly put my focus into that. And that sort of coincided with my, finishing of my attempt at a cricket career. So the timing worked quite well.
Do you think anything that you'd like learned before or experiences you'd had in the past that contributed to you wanting to start a charity?
Yeah, I'd say probably two things really. First of all, the whole charity centers around the cause of mental health provision amongst athletes, and my own personal experiences obviously, pretty much directly led me into wanting to create that as a charity. And so I don't think I would have just plucked that out of thin air if I hadn't have gone through it. And that's definitely been, I think, quite a good strength in terms of actually trying to drive the charity forward, because I've come from that sport environment. But then secondly, I think I was looking forward to doing my own thing. I'd always been I was at boarding school, which I absolutely loved, but it's obviously quite a constraining environment. And then I'd also spent my whole time in the even though I wasn't a professional cricketer, it's almost like the professional cricket environment, on an academy system where we're constantly getting told what to do and when to do it. And, you've constantly got people who have pretty much power over your career. And so I wanted really to sort of take it into my own hands and have a lot more independence. And I found that a really liberating experience, to be honest. And by the time I stopped trying to be a pro cricketer and started doing my own thing, it was, a huge positive change for me, not just career wise, but I think mentally.
So I think for us, the important thing is understanding how you suddenly discovered this new path. So when you went on that gap year and we were in South Africa together, was there a time there that maybe triggered the start of Sporting Wellness?
Well, I definitely knew when I went on that gap year, which would have been January, that when I came back, I was going to try and do the charity regardless of where my cricket was at. And then I think during the gap year, I slowly started moving towards the gap year with cricket being, turning more into like a social fun experience rather than a really serious, cricket-based thing. I think I'd be lying to myself if I thought I was going to come back to England and walk into a professional cricket contract. I remember having a talk, which you'd have probably been on, Jamie, where we're having a talk from one of our coaches, and they were saying, if you want to be a pro cricketer, then it's got to be like the only thing in your life. You've got to be 100% all in. And I knew that I was nowhere near 100% all in at all. And I was pretty content with that, to be honest. So as that carried on, by the time I got back to England, I knew that I was probably going to have a couple of months of trying with cricket, but I think pretty much, maybe subconsciously, but I knew that wasn't going to be the career path I was going to go down.
How did you deal with that realization that like maybe for the last 2 years you'd been dedicating your life to cricket, and all of a sudden you're like, well, this is not happening anymore?
I think by that stage it was very easy to deal with, because I'd come to terms with it. It was more the year before, when it was still something that I thought I really wanted to do. It was more the year before 2018 where it hit me quite hard, and that was when I was going through those mental health difficulties. By the time it got to that stage, I was much more at ease with it, and I sort of almost moved on from it a little bit, moved on from the idea of not being a a professional cricketer, but the year before it did affect me quite a lot because my whole identity was wrapped up in being a cricketer. It was, throughout like social circles and stuff, and whether it be family and friends, that was all I was really known for. I wasn't really known for anything else. And then when I realized that was, going to be taken away from me, not for any malicious reason, just because I wasn't good enough. That was quite hard to deal with because you almost lose a part of your identity. So that was difficult. But by the time it got to that stage when I started the charity, fortunately, I'd had probably about a year of coming to terms with it.
Cool. So I guess what you're saying is that having that alternative vision or alternative interest is what kind of what helped you through it, right? Is that right?
Yeah, definitely. I think having something else to not base my identity on, because I don't think anyone's identity should be on one particular thing, but having like an alternative thing to focus on, an alternative thing to really like put my energy into and try and be successful at was hugely valuable to me. But it was also something that I could control a lot more than my cricket. Obviously, you can control, how good you are as an athlete, but there's also a lot outside of your control. Whereas I felt with the charity stuff and starting my own organization, there was a lot more that I could control myself, and whether it was successful or not was going to be much more down to what I did rather than loads of external factors. And so that was very liberating, to be honest.
I think one of the biggest messages from your kind of starting out in that pathway going down and founding Sporting Wellness is that it was something that affected you when you were much younger, that you looked into in more detail, and then you did something about it, and you discovered this opportunity where you could create a very successful charity and something that you felt passionate about and resonated quite a lot with you. But I think for anyone listening, they probably think, how the hell do you go from thinking let's start a mental health charity to actually starting one?
Yeah, it sort of pieced itself together bit by bit. And to be honest, the first actually setting it up and getting off the ground is definitely, I think, the most fun part, because you're very naive about it and it's all very new. There's a lot of novelty involved, and it's quite it is very fun, but it's very basic stuff at the start, thinking about a name, which I'm sure we'll probably get onto, thinking about things like logos, getting a website, creating a social media page, all that sort of stuff, thinking about actually what the charity is going to do and how it's going to do it. Your mind just starts to race with loads of things, and you start to envisage what it could be in the future. And there's also the admin side of things of like, going through the application to become a charity, which is a lot of red tape, and that was quite difficult to get my head around and stuff like that. But I mean, it's really simple stuff. It's getting a website, it's building a sort of brand in terms of a logo and that sort of stuff, and then just getting trying to get charitable status. And as soon as you have that, then you technically have a charity.
How did you go about collecting information about how to do that? Did you speak to people who had already done it? Did you just do research yourself? What helped you?
There was it was very simple. There was like I just Googled it, to be honest, like what you needed to do to start a charity. I think there's an article that Forbes did, like they just numbered what you needed to do. And so literally I just sort of wrote that down, and then followed those steps. I mean, it sounds pretty simple, but I didn't speak to anyone that had set up charities before. I literally just pretty much did what Google told me to do, to be honest. And then went from there. But yeah, setting it up is one thing, and then actually like launching the charity and the services aspect of the charity is something else. Because I mean, yeah, you can have a website and you can have charitable status, but that doesn't really do anything. That's literally just like a blank sheet of paper, and then you go from there.
Yeah, I love the confidence. Did you have any bits at the start that went badly?
Yeah, well, it took ages to get charitable status, and you basically get assigned a sort of officer from the charity commission that oversees your application. They give you loads of feedback, and that was very new, and going through all the sort of hurdles you have to go through in terms of explaining why you need to be a charity and what aspect of the community or population you're going to serve. That was just very admin heavy. And then in terms of once we got going, there was probably the first big thing we got hit with was when we had to change our names. We were called Sporting Minds originally, and then we had to change it. So that was probably the first big obstacle, and that was quite a long process.
Explain a bit more about that, if I don't know if you're allowed to, but
yeah. No, we basically got hit with a trademark dispute essentially, and what originally that looked like was, so we were called Sporting Minds, and then another charity with a similar name basically sent an email originally just saying like, so you've got a similar name, we've got a trademark, can we have a chat? And it started off pretty amicably in terms of, the other charity exploring ideas of how to work with each other, and then it became clear that they just wanted us to completely change our name, which was they were perfectly entitled to do, to be fair, because they had a trademark, we didn't. And that was something that as a sort of 19-year-old I didn't really think about, and I'd obviously put in a good probably year and a half work into creating something with that name, and then to be told that you've got to change it was pretty that was definitely the first time where I had like sleepless nights over things. So I was constantly thinking that I'd done all this hard work, and to do a name change could be completely detrimental to all the work I've put in up to now. How are athletes going to find it? How is it going to confuse people? Is it going to be the start of the brand slowly slipping down? And was the first year and a half just like a bit of a wave that is now going to peter out because of this? And so that was quite a difficult experience at the time, just because I become so emotionally attached with the charity, and by definition you get attached to the name of that as well. But then you realize that a name is just a name, and you make it. But at the time it was, I did have quite a few sleepless nights over that, actually.
No, I can see for a 19-year-old particularly, that's a pretty major obstacle to face pretty early doors. And was that maybe the first time, and you mentioned it was the first time you had sleepless nights, but is it time maybe for a bit of imposter syndrome? Someone as a 19-year-old starting a charity, you're in an unknown sphere and trying to find your own way in it. Has there been other times where you've also felt like, God, how have I got myself here?
Yeah, a little bit. I've experienced that, I suppose, with both when stuff has gone wrong and then when there's also been like a good amount of success. We got to a stage in the end of 2021 where we essentially like ran out of money, to be honest. Our healthcare costs were way too high, and we were probably paying too many like part-time staff and associates that were all doing great stuff, but we just weren't bringing in enough money for the amount that we were spending. And so that was when I thought like there was a bit of imposter syndrome stuff in terms of like, have I let the charity get into this sort of place? That was quite that was very frustrating. And that was probably the other thing, along with the name change, that kept me up at night. I'd sort of be up at, in the middle of the night calculating all the monthly costs that month as if it was ever going to change. They're obviously fixed for that particular month. And then on the flip side, when stuff has gone really well, and we've done stuff with like the when we first started to do some stuff with the government, or when we've done some stuff with big athletes, that's at times made me think that the charity's come a long way very quick, and whether it deserved to be in that place in just a few years, and whether it could maintain it, and what the sort of risk to reputation would be if this was like the biggest thing that the charity ever did in its first couple of years. And so I think those things always come along, and I think they're pretty natural to experience, to be honest. But as long as you know that the core services that you're providing are good and sustainable and have utility to the people that you're trying to help, then you'll be fine, really. I think it's just a natural thing to go through.
To go down a slightly different track then, from everything you've described so far, it sounds pretty full on. If you're starting a charity like that and it's obviously been successful, you must have had to have given it a lot of hours. But you still went to university after that, and obviously from spending time with you before, I know you're partial to a few drinks, and I'm sure you had a great time doing your freshers. But how did you do the charity while starting as a fresher at university alongside your sport?
Yeah, I think I definitely made some sacrifices whilst I was a student, and I don't think I got as much out of university as I think other people have. And I reckon, so when we were on our gap year together, Jamie, I reckon I was a lot more sociable then than I was at university. I think at times during uni, I was quite reclusive, and I would definitely focus on my charity stuff a lot more than going out. And I think I struggled at times with the drinking culture a little bit at university. I found that the only way to socialize was to, like, obviously go out, binge drinking throughout the week. And when I had meetings the next day on like Thursdays and stuff, that wasn't something that I could really do, or I definitely wasn't willing to do it because I had my charity commitments. And I found that I was fortunate in some aspects. I kept playing cricket, and that was a great way to still be sociable and engage with people, but then at the same time I did find myself becoming a little bit more reclusive, and I think that was because I was focusing on the charity a lot, especially in my first 2 years. It was basically all I did, to be fair. But I wouldn't change it. I think that was just a trade-off that I was willing to make at that time.
How did you deal personally with that? Knowing that you had a different path to, say, a lot of people who were around you and going out and drinking and perhaps not doing stuff in the day?
Yeah, I think at times I struggle with it a little bit because you don't want to feel like you're missing out on what people say are the best years of your life, and there's always that narrative at uni that it's the best time you're ever going to get, and you're not going to get that time back. And so there was always that little sort of person in my ear, sort of like imaginary, just saying that you're potentially not wasting, but passing up on some opportunities at uni. And obviously COVID happened as well, which probably didn't make it any easier. And so yeah, I think it was difficult at times, but at the end of the day I didn't have it too bad. I think a lot of other people struggle a lot more at university, whether they're coming from different countries or they don't quite mix in with the drinking culture anywhere near as much as I did. And so I think that at times it was hard, and but looking back, I made that decision to focus on my charity as much as I did, and no one was forcing me to do that, and I didn't experience anyone purposefully alienating me or anything like that. But it was none of that. It was all my decision, and at the end of the day, that was the decision I made, and looking back, I wouldn't change it.
What kept you motivated during that? A lot of people, I think, listening may feel like they have an idea, and then that thing in their ear will overpower them, and they'll end up getting involved in stuff that they know is detrimental to whatever they're actually passionate about.
No, it wasn't really like doing the cool stuff, the sort of cool external stuff. I think it was more the fact that it was my own organization, and I felt very sort of personally attached to it. And it was the first time that I'd had proper independence on my own work. And it was starting to gather momentum. It was starting to do well. We were starting to support athletes, and it was starting to sort of work as a thing. And so, once I started to see that as a bit of a success, I wanted to make sure that continued, really. I think there was a little bit of stubbornness in wanting to prove that, maybe to myself, that I wasn't just a cricketer, and that wasn't the only thing I could do. And so I think that motivated me quite a bit. But then at the same time, I think there was also a little bit of fear of failure in there, and not wanting to give up on what was a good couple of years start for it. So probably a little bit of both. But I think what motivated me was really that I could see the success it was starting to have, and I didn't want to lose that. And so I just tried to double down on it, really. Pretty much, I think if you're doing anything, really, you have to do something that you have a natural interest for, because if you don't have a natural interest for it, then you're never going to work hard on it anyway, because it's going to be too much of a battle. And so, yeah, I was lucky that I was doing something I had a natural interest for, and that naturally drives you to work much harder than if you're fighting against something that you don't like doing, such as uni studies or exams. So it wasn't, motivation wasn't too much of an issue.
It sounds like you had that curiosity, particularly in the mental health sphere, which led you to finding sporting wellness. But why didn't your curiosity stop there in terms of these career paths? So you kind of kept your options open, and then at some point along the way, an opportunity comes up where you start looking into sports agency. So just explain a little bit about what that involves and how did that link into the sporting wellness at all, or was that a separate career path you pursued?
I suppose it linked in as much as that I had started to work a little bit within the sports industry, and I'd kept my sort of ties from sport that I started when I was a cricketer. But in many ways, it is very separate, to be honest. I suppose the main reason why I wanted to get into that was because I knew that I needed to earn money at the same time as running the charity, because you don't earn a lot of money starting your own charity, especially not for the first 10, 15 years. And it's not as if the charity was paying me. I didn't earn any money from the charity until about a year ago, so I was completely unpaid. And so I knew that for me to be able to continue to do the charity, I needed to do something else. And for me to be able to do something else and also keep doing the charity, it needed to be something that wasn't a 9-to-5 job, but still paid me money. And then also it needed to be something that I was naturally interested in and wanted to do. And so that's where I sort of went back to, because I do enjoy cricket. I do love the sport. And so that's where really the idea started, with wanting to get into the sort of agency side within cricket, especially with the way that franchise cricket was going. But originally it was just the best way I thought that I could continue to run the charity and also, earn money, because it is essential.
I think that's where it comes down to the next question is how do you decide what you're prioritizing there? Because yes, of course, you want to give all the time and effort into the charity, but realistically, the way the world works, you have to go out and get a job like that.
Well, the student stuff definitely came last, so that pretty easy to decide. But again, very fortunate that the sports agency stuff it's a very fluid industry, and especially at that stage when I was only getting started, it was very reactionary, that there wasn't loads to do in the first couple of years, and it sort of gradually built up as I've been doing it now for probably close to 4 years, probably. But so originally my time was probably 80% charity, or sort of 70% charity, 20% agency stuff, and then I'd fit in the uni stuff when I can. And then as that's progressed, it's evened itself up a little bit. But the way that the agency stuff works for me, it is pretty easy to fit my time around it, because I've got control of my time with the charity completely. And as long as I plan things far enough in ahead in terms of meetings and stuff, it's not really something that presents too many challenges.
Again, it begs the question, like, how say about these like international franchises and the different leagues and managing the players, how have you learned how to do that? Because it's not something they teach you in school.
Well, basically James Welch, who's the owner of the agency, pretty much taught me everything by just showing me, really, and getting me in on calls and introducing me to people and showing me how it was done, and essentially handing over a lot of responsibility to me very early, in a way where I thought at times that I was nowhere near ready to handle that sort of responsibility. But he almost sort of like held my hand with it for the first couple of years, which is great, because I think the only way you can learn something like that, and it's very similar to lots of other jobs, is actually by doing it. And then the more you do it, the more different scenarios you see and the more experiences you get. And so you start to become, I think you start to learn quite quick.
It's unreal that you managed to almost find a mentor, which I think is such an important thing, like when navigating it, something which is so foreign to people our age. How did you go about finding him in the first place?
It was purely luck. There was no, I mean, it'd be very easy for me to sit here and sort of post-rationalize it and make it sound like there was a great plan in place. I mean, there definitely wasn't. It was very, very lucky, very fluky. I messaged a few on Instagram. He happened to be the one that responded. It wasn't a case of evaluating whether he was the guy I wanted to follow or the company that I wanted to get involved with. Like, I was always gonna pretty much take the first opportunity that I could, because I knew that there wasn't many opportunities going. And then I was just very fortunate to land at a company that I think is really, really good, and a mentor certainly within that field that has been amazing to me, really. But it's all been luck. But I think that it's more around the sort of trying to have the presence of mind to just take advantage of it and try and make yourself a big enough target for luck, really. And that's what I try and do with the charity as well. And then also what I try and sort of shape my life up to be in terms of just in general for whatever the next sort of 10 years holds, and just try and make myself as big a target for luck as possible, I think.
And how do you go about increasing your surface area?
Just, I don't like not trying to plan like anything, and just going with where your natural curiosities take you, and just like following your gut and following your instincts with it. Like earlier today, I went to a conference that was just a free event, like in London, which was it was about democracy and politics. It's not something that's related to any of my work at all, but it was just another opportunity to meet people. And I think a lot of the great ideas are things that come up when you sort of I suppose when two fields sort of become intersected. And I think if you narrow yourself down into just what you do all the time, then that's never going to happen. I suppose the one thing I have done to try and make myself a bigger target for luck is by deciding to live in London, because I lived in Staffordshire in a pretty small village. I can realistically work from anywhere from the work I do. And so I decided to live in London just because there's the most amount of people here, the most amount of businesses here, the most amount of opportunities. So I think that's probably one thing, trying to live in a city where, you can make yourself a bigger target for luck. And then once you're in that place, try and just go with your instincts and follow your curiosities, try and do as many things as possible.
Put anybody listening into your shoes for now. So you've gone through the first few years, which is probably, as you said, the toughest for starting a charity. Plus, you've sorted out yourself a gig in the sports agency world, which again is a niche career path, but something that's you're enjoying and has followed interest. And now you're based in London, having finished university. So talk us through what's like a day in your life at the moment.
Day in the life. Well, I definitely don't get up at like 5 a.m. or anything like that, like you saw. But I
don't give me that credit.
I was going straight on the pod.
I don't overplan my days. I don't stick to a really, really strict routine on stuff, because I don't know. I think I like to have some sort of spontaneity with what I do, but I try and work outside of the flat that I live in as much as possible. So I try and hot desk around London in different locations, which I think really helps me in terms of like creating a routine for myself. But essentially, I wake up and I'm pretty much free to build my day however I want to do it. And so I get out of the flat as early as I can in the morning, and then I just start working on the projects that I need to, and they can be really short term, or it can be spending 2 or 3 days thinking about 2 or 3 years in advance for the charity. But I'm very fortunate that I don't have a very no one structures my day for me. It's something that I do myself.
It's so interesting because we definitely, as we said, that's definitely a massive positive. But I guess you spoke about the stress that does cause, and the autonomy is so good, but then you've got all this responsibility as well. And maybe you touched on previous mental health problems you'd had when you were younger, and I can imagine that running your own thing, especially having so many other people's mental health that you're involved with and supporting, how have you actually dealt personally with maybe those struggles you had in the past, and what coping mechanisms have you used to keep yourself proactive and successful right now?
Again, I think I've been pretty fortunate that doing the charity, starting the charity, doing work that I love doing, also with the agency stuff as well as the charity, has been a really good it's had a really good effect on my own mental health, and it's given me a big purpose away from what originally was my whole identity in cricket. And it's also something that is a lot of the time within my control. So I've been lucky that I enjoy my work so much that it does have a sort of another benefit in boosting, I think, my overall well-being, and having my own independence, I think, is huge for my mental well-being as well. I think if I was employed and doing a job that I didn't like, I think it'd be a whole nother ball game, and I think just mentally I wouldn't be suited to that at all. I think that would be a much bigger risk to my mental health than any stress that having my own charity or working as a sport agent could bring.
Okay, so to play like a little bit of a devil's advocate, because I have my mum nagging at me, like I know the world you're working in, and you mentioned like working into the evenings. Sometimes you're taking calls at whatever time of night, but how do you see it as sustainable?
I think it's pretty sustainable at the moment. I mean, the obvious answer is I don't know, and we'll have to see. And if it comes to a stage where in 5-10 years or whatever where I can't sustain it, then I guess we'll find out. But at least that would show me where the line is, I suppose, and then hopefully I could drag it back from there. But I think much better way is to find out where the line is rather than being scared of going anywhere near it.
Talk to us about how you can put your own time scale on it. Maybe the next year. I know you joked off camera with me last night that you don't have a clue, but in the next year or 10 years, where do you see it going?
I'm always pretty skeptical of people that say, like, oh, I'm going to do this for 2-3 years, then I'm going to do this for 2-3 years. I think that normally, like, you can tell there's a bit of bullshit in that, to be fair. But at the moment, I'm happy with doing what I do. I enjoy doing it. I think I can't see myself doing anything different. But what I do want to do is move myself into a position where I don't have to be the sort of CEO of the charity. I'll always be its founder. But you know, the cricket agency stuff has a lot of upside in it, and I want to make sure that if I'm in a position to capitalize on any potential upside there, then I'm in a position to be able to do that rather than having to always be tied into the charity. And so that's probably my main job as the sort of founder of the charity, get it into a position where I can ultimately be replaceable. And then at the end of the day, I'll have the option to leave the charity if I want to. And that's much better than not having the option. So I don't think I'll move away from what I'm doing at the moment. I've got a pretty strong belief that it should take a long-term view on it, but at the same time move myself into a hopefully position where I'm ultimately replaceable as the charity's CEO. And so it again goes back to what we were talking about earlier in terms of like getting yourself into a good position to take advantage of any luck that comes your way and potential upside.
Okay, well, it's been unreal listening to you, Cal. Thanks so much for your time. We're going to finish our podcast with a question that we're going to ask every guest. So we want to know 3 things. You're going back to talk to yourself, maybe say 5 years ago. And we want to say one thing you do the same, one thing you do differently, and one thing that you tell yourself 5 years ago to motivate yourself to get into the place you're in now.
Well, the thing I would do the same is not get any funny ideas about going and working in finance or anything like that. I think that's definitely something I'm glad I did. I'm glad I didn't get suckered into the whole sort of status thing of going into the city and doing finance. Not because I think there's inherently anything wrong with doing that. I just know that I wasn't suited to that at all. So I'm very, very happy that I didn't go down such what I think would have been for me personally, a pretty boring career path. So I'm glad I didn't do that. Doing something differently, I think I would have, if I'd have spoken to myself 5 years ago, I'd have told myself within the context of running the charity, I'd have told myself to take a much more serious approach to fundraising at a much earlier stage, literally from within the first day of starting the charity, because quite a big mistake I made early doors was just thinking that the fundraising would take care of itself. And that in part came because of COVID, and COVID was when the charity first started. And it was actually for us quite easy to raise money during that period because there were so many people doing these fitness challenges during COVID for charity. So we didn't really have to work that hard to bring fundraising in. But then as soon as COVID finished, that fundraising dried up. But I'd spent that time only focusing on the fun aspects of the charity, like the marketing and that sort of stuff. So I didn't take the fundraising side anywhere near as seriously as I should have done. So I'd have told myself to do that differently and realize that the most important thing is income when it comes to a charity. And then to motivate myself, I would have said that the charity has got a very good way of potentially ensuring equality of access for mental health care in athletes, and that, you know, that's an opportunity to try and actually, you know, have a quite a decent impact and start an organization that fulfills quite a, you know, gaping hole in sport. And so, you know, take that as seriously as you can, and, you know, realize that that's a pretty big opportunity.
No, spot on, mate. And yeah, we'll wrap up there, because obviously a busy man like yourself needs to sleep, and it's past 11 here in England. I put my neck on the line when I said to Sol that Cal would be a perfect guest, and I think you've lived up to it. So I think some pretty good messages, banging on the lines of the kind of thing we wanted to get out of you. And yeah, particularly interesting for the both of us just to listen to it, and two pretty different paths less chosen, but two ones that we've learned a lot about already. So really appreciate your time, mate.
Nice, thank you guys. I really enjoyed having the conversation. Hopefully it was okay as a first guest, and I think it's a great topic to do a podcast around. And hopefully, if you can, in a few years' time, encourage more people to think outside the box with different career paths, and I think that'd be an awesome thing to do. So yeah, absolute pleasure. Really enjoyed it.
Okay, that was an interesting chat. Enjoyed that a lot.
Yeah, very good.
So we now need to come up with 3 key takeaways for the people listening of what we think are the most important things to take from that conversation. So do you want to fire away with anything you got in mind?
Yeah, I think the first one for me was finding something that, like, I think it's easy to say, find something you're passionate about. You know, I think we're going to say that about most guests, but what it struck me with him was he found something that made it worth the sacrifices that he's kind of made. And through the charity and what he was doing with starting Sporting Wellness, it made everything so worth giving up other stuff, because he was so happy with what he was doing. He was so content with giving that all his energy.
100%. Yeah, I mean, like, especially like his age when he was talking, I think that's the key. Otherwise, you're just going to get distracted by anything. Yeah. I'll throw in, he said, you know, you make yourself a bigger target for luck as possible. And I think that's so key, because I think a lot of people look from the outside at a few of these people who are doing like super well, starting their cool charities, and they say, oh, these people are incredibly lucky. And of course they are lucky, but that luck, I think, comes from putting themselves in the right room. I'll throw that in as maybe our second one.
No, I think I agree with you. As well as the right room, he just puts himself in the right areas. And he's moved to London not because he's in an office 9 to 5 every day, Monday to Friday, but because he wants to be in a hub of where the most people are, where he can meet these people.
Yeah, 100%. Cool. So we're still in a second.
Yeah, I think maybe the one that I was thinking of was that actually what led him to doing the Sporting Wellness charity was something that actually had been an issue for him earlier in life. And sometimes, like, people might face these obstacles like when they were younger, and they might remember them as challenging times, but the majority of us would never act on it. And I think for him to then come up with this idea, which to some might seem far-fetched, like, right, I couldn't get access to mental health support when I was younger as a budding athlete, so maybe I can do something about that and set that up. And then he's actually acted upon that.
I like your one, and I'll actually add a little bit onto it, that I think if people are thinking about starting things, a great place to think about starting things is about solving problems you've had yourself. Like the idea of channeling something bad that's happened to you and something you've seen as a problem, and then starting something that aims to solve that problem. I think that's got to be one of the fundamental ways that companies start. So yeah, you can have that. You can have that one early doors in the first episode. Let's sum up those 3. So the first one being doing something that makes those distractions that you have worth missing out on. The second one being making yourself a bigger target for luck as possible. And the third one being channeling something that's caused you issues and then solving that problem and making that what you're about.
Yeah, no, I think beautifully summed up from you there, Sol. It was very good. We've got lots of key takeaways there. We probably could have gone on and listed 5 or 10, but yeah, for me, I think those are probably the 3 best ones. And if we can get useful information like that out of each guest we have, then hopefully it'll be a productive podcast.
100%. Looking forward to the next episode, mate.